Okay. Sony A7 III. Wonderful. The only thing that's actually going to embarrass me about this video, and not really, is that I said, I do, and I mean that I'd be completely fair to this camera. Logically so, it is the case that everybody knows that I'm not a fan of Sony. However, when I reviewed the Sony A9, I was completely fair to it, and tons of Sony fanboys thanked me for being fair to it. People are going to accuse me of not being fair to this camera. By the way, I got used to this camera within about 12 hours or so. Both got familiar with all menus, all settings, and so obviously it does take time to get used to a camera, certainly so. Especially to, new layouts, new menus. Of course, you can get used to a lot. I mean, you could get used to a rock being in your shoe. There's an old Russian joke about life was so miserable that people would put a rock in their shoe before going to work in the morning. That way, when they got home, they could take the rock out and relax, because that was the only good part of their day. So you can get used to a lot, but just because you get used to it doesn't mean it's good, or doesn't mean that it's something that you should get used to. Well, I spent a lot of time with this camera. I posted a lot of test shots. Some of the phony Sony fanboys were chirping about what I said about the A7 III yesterday. I mean, I praised its battery life, and obviously the video on this camera is certainly so superior to both Nikon and Fujifilm. And if someone is just strictly a video user, obviously this would be a superior choice. I've made no bones about the fact that I am not a video person, nor am I really interested in video, so we can leave that settled. And that is something where I said, Sony's got Fujifilm beat for video. It is, however, a case, and others have done tests, people that are even hardcore Sony fanboys, and they've done side-by-side comparisons between the Sony A7 III and the XH1, and they show that for video use, the stabilization is inferior, but that's not because there's anything inferior about Sony. It's just simple physics that to do really fast in-body image stabilization for video, there is more mass to compensate for on a larger sensor and the platform behind it than there is on a smaller sensor. And this, of course, is why Micro Four Thirds sensors from Panasonic are just insanely good at video stabilization. So it's like, well, is it a magic of Panasonic? Well, partially so, but it's the actual physics of the fact that a smaller sensor is easier to move around. I mean, this is the reason why really huge, super thick steel cars from the 1960s are really bad about taking a turn. You know, has something to do with mass and inertia. And the same is true of a larger sensor. I was actually shocked by this camera, and not in a good way. I mean, I really was. Said I got used to it quickly. I did find the camera extremely unpleasant to use. Great stuff about the camera, obviously so video. There's just no denying Sony owns it for video. Well, I mean, they don't own it compared to Panasonic. Panasonic has them beat. They don't own it compared to a Red or another true professional video camera. Don't have to be a video geek to know the obvious fact there. I mean, Panasonic owns everybody's ass on that front. And Red owns everybody's ass on that front as well. But, I mean, that's a lot more expensive of a camera, and it's not also a primary photography camera. All the talk about how great the battery life is on the Sony A7 III, I found to be inaccurate. It's actually better than what they said. So the battery life is incredible on the Sony. I mean, it just kept going and going and going with basically no diminishment on the battery. It does, however, I charged this battery, how many times have I charged it and used it so far? 4 times already? It does take a really, really long time to charge. And by the way, this is something that's really stupid. If you buy a piece of crap Nikon camera at Costco, like their lowest end piece of poo, it comes with a real battery charger where you can take the damn battery out and charge the... The only thing this stupid thing comes with is a USB charging cable to charge it through this. And if you had an electrical surge, This is connected, this is actually part of the main board. That means you'll fry your camera. Really, really stupid. I mean, this camera, by the way, is made in China. Sony should actually include a real battery charger with this damn camera. What would it cost them? Another $4 to do that? Why Sony doesn't include a real battery charger with their camera is absolutely mind-blowing. So we got great video. We got incredible battery life. The dynamic range, even before picking up this camera, I told all the Sony fanboys, I said, yeah, I know for a fact that this is a 24 megapixel camera, and it has a backside illuminated sensor, so it has a stop and a third better dynamic range, so it'll be basically like the output of a Nikon D750, except even better. And that is the case. So this camera does have amazing dynamic range. Tested the eye autofocus with 2 people. Eye autofocus is as incredible as everybody said. Eye autofocus has everybody else beat. It sure the hell does. There's just no denying that. Have to be fair to this camera. It does also have, over Nikon and Fujifilm, superior diopter adjustment, not in the placement of it where the physical ergos, but it actually has a broader range for diopter adjustment on the A9. I actually was not expecting that, and that's actually superior on the Sony. So it's good that they got that right. Whew, now here comes the part where everybody's going to hate me. And by the way, let me start to mention this. If everybody compare, everybody's loved to say, well, this camera's $2,000, and the Fujifilm is also $2,000. By the way, right now the Fujifilm comes with a vertical grip altogether collectively for the same price as this camera. But anyway, the basic camera, $2,000, $2,000. Have I pointed out the fact that this is made out of Chinesium? Oh, excuse me, did I say made out of Chinesium? What I meant to say was it's made in China. This is an old A7 chassis with 2 new things in it, a main board and a new sensor. This is a cheaply made Chinese camera. Is it all magnesium chassis? Sure the hell is. But yeah, this is made by slave labor, made in China. This is a very, very high quality product with higher precision, higher attention to detail in manufacturing in Japan. Japan, China. Japan, China. Yeah. This is Fujifilm's flagship camera. This is by any definition, this is the cheap version of Sony's camera. Is it cheap? But it's cheap relative to what? It's very cheap compared to the Sony A9, which I did test. It's very cheap compared to the Sony A7III. So, yeah, $2,000. So here's what sucks on this camera. And some of these things Sony fanboys have mentioned. There's no damn lossless compression. There's no lossless raw compression. There is an AA filter on this. That sucks. There is an AA filter on this. It is, however, what they call a light AA filter in that it only corrects for vertical and not horizontal. Yeah, the AA filter on the Sony A7III only filters horizontal, not vertical, whereas like on the A9 it filters both vertical and horizontal aliasing. There are no clickable front or rear command dials for further customization. There's no real battery charger for this goddamn camera. Like I said, you could buy the cheapest piece of crap camera from Fujifilm or Nikon and Canon and get a real battery charger. What the Christ sakes is wrong with Sony in doing that? I mean, it makes no damn sense at all. Continuous autofocus is smooth and not jerky, but all this talk, I only tested the Sony G Master 2470. It's not impressive. There's nothing superior about the continuous autofocusing going between near and far, bright light, low light. I found absolutely no advantage to this camera as opposed to like a D500 Nikon, D850. And of course, autofocus speed is based upon 2 things. It's not simply camera based, it's also lens based. You stick a slow autofocus lens because you have 5 different, and this is what none of these other YouTube asshats realize. They talk about how fast an camera's autofocus is, as if a camera is solely due itself alone for autofocus acquisition and tracking. That is not the case at all. It is lens side, it is camera side. You have linear motors, stepper motors, silent wave motors, micro motors, linear motors. So stop talking about camera autofocus speed. This camera was in no way impressive over that of Fujifilm's X-T2, X-H1, Nikon D500, Nikon D850. The ergonomics are absolutely... Is this subjective? Maybe. So the ergonomics on this camera made me want to claw my eyes out and sandpaper my crotch in anger. Just horrible. You see this red spot on my knuckle of my front knuckle of my middle finger? That's from this. I mean, it's not like I have huge ass gorilla hands. You know, you see some people that can't hold anything. They don't have the hands for it. It's tearing the skin off my knuckle. What asshat at Sony, and I do mean this literally, what asshat at Sony hasn't heard enough hundreds of thousands of people bitching about the horrific ergonomics? Well, that's subjective. Well, it is subjective, but there's thousands of people complaining about it. The ergonomics on this camera absolutely suck. They're just horrible, horrible ergonomics. The menu systems, even though I became, not only did I become completely familiar with the menu system on this camera, I even set up my custom menus, you know? So I became completely familiar with this. You know, I can become completely familiar with a rock in my shoe and walk around with it stabbing my foot all day long, too. But that doesn't mean it's good or desirable. I am familiar with the menu system on this camera. That does not mean it is not also horrible. The menu system is disgusting. It's horrible, it's abysmal, it's nightmarish. Only some sort of brain-dead, mental midget, knuckle-dragging, subhuman idiot would think of this menu. What team of people at Sony thought that this menu system was a good... Yeah, it's okay, we're going to go with that. It's just horrible. The joystick is miserable. It doesn't actually have a real joystick. It's flat. I mean, is it that bad? No, not really. Is that subjective? Certainly so. Is that empirical fact? It's half and half. It's not a real joystick on the back of this camera. You actually have a flat plate with 4 raised ridge bumps on it. It's not a pleasure to use. I mean, it's not an actual joystick that sticks out like somebody's pecker sticks out of the front of their body, right? Kind of humorous there, but you get my point. For some reason, Nikon and Fujifilm have actually managed to stick a joystick on the back of their camera that does stick out. I have no idea why Sony did that, just other than to make the back of the camera flat and flush with like the rear command dial. So everything is on an even plane, but that doesn't mean it's ergonomically superior, it's ergonomically inferior. This is undeniable. You have to go to charge the battery since there's no real battery charger, which of course, yeah, okay, battery charger. These are, even when people were bitching so much about the Fujifilm X-H1, where the doors were kind of flimsy and when the camera got some age on it, they wouldn't really stick together, they were nothing anywhere near as horrific and disgusting as these. Imagine buying a cheap crap $10 toy made in China at Walmart. And like it has a port on the side for charging the little toy. There is absolutely not one iota of difference between the cheapest plastic crap $5 toy at Walmart door and the door on the... By the way, you actually have to find a magical position between like 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock to be able to fit the charging, the micro USB port in there for charging this camera. These are the cheapest crap doors. This is not my opinion. This is a fact. There does not exist a cheaper crap plastic door on any sort of piece of junk than these are. This is just, these are horrible. Beyond horrible. Total, absolute, undeniable garbage. Is that my subjective belief? No, that's a fact. You cannot make a plastic door on the side of any toy or camera cheaper or junkier than these. As much as there was a design failure on the the XT1, where the doors were, you know, they get flimsy over time. It's nothing. Pales in comparison to this. Beyond horrific. Shockingly horrific. Very shocked. I was shocked. I was shocked that the EVF is worse on... I thought it would be as good or maybe a hair better. No, the EVF on this camera is worse. And I did stick it in high mode, not standard, okay? So I did change everything around to make sure I had it at max. The EVF on this thing is much worse than on the X-H1. There's no vertical grip option for this camera, which, hey, you know, it's their cheap camera. It's their $2,000 Chinese-made camera. There's no option for a vertical grip on this. Just none at all. Everybody kept comparing it to the $2,000 Fujifilm X-H1. Well, this is their flagship camera, made in Japan. Everything on this camera, by the way, even if you hate Fujifilm, say, I don't want this damn camera, you know. It's a crop sensor, I don't want it. The ergonomics, the layout, everything on this camera is far, far, far superior to this thing. Everything. The user interaction between this camera and this camera is night and day. No comparison at all. None. There's no front function button on this camera. For some reason, Canon and Nikon and Fujifilm have half a brain to realize that people want front function buttons. Why would you want them? So you don't have to stick your other hand up there. You could actually hit a front function. I have like one of my front function buttons set for playback. That way I can keep my hand on the camera, click this front function button and hit playback, go around. No front function button on this damn camera at all. Playback is in a really, really bad location on this. By the way, you know there's no pinch to zoom in or zoom out on this camera? There's another YouTube channel, guy with gray hair, whose exact words were, and he didn't do an X-H1 review. He did a X-H1 versus A7III review, which was horrible, by the way. And he said, well, the touchscreen on the X-H1 sucks. It just really sucks. Sucks compared to what? This camera that he's comparing it to? No, girlfriend. No, you're dead wrong, and this isn't my opinion. The touchscreen on this camera sucks. And I can tell you one thing that is an empirical fact. There is no, when you actually look at an image, it sucks far worse to swipe on this camera. This one's not good at all compared to the Fuji. And there is no pinch to zoom or zoom out on this camera at all. There is on the X-H1, not here. No, there is no pinch, zoom out. No, there is not. So you want to talk about other YouTube photography channel, you want to talk about sucks on touchscreen? This touchscreen sucks. Absolutely sucks. Even more so, when he was reviewing earlier Sony cameras, he would actually complain about how much the touchscreen sucked. Well, it's no more improved on this one than it is on the Sony A9. Touchscreen on this sucks. There is no shutter dial. There is no ISO dial. Well, if you don't want dials, that's fine. So is that subjective? Yes and no. There's no, the top plate. Here's the amazing thing. Even a cheap Nikon, even a cheap Canon, do you notice that they've decided to use all this, the most important real estate on the camera? By the way, it's not the back where it is important, but on the top. They've decided, unlike every other camera manufacturer on earth, to not stick a single goddamn thing right here. There's nothing there. Nothing is there. Nothing. Can you feel that? That's the feel of nothing. What the hell? Horrible, horrible interface. Horrible interface. It's just a lot of empty space doing nothing. There's no weather sealing, as others have reported, and having taken the camera apart. There's even a famous video where this camera failed bad on a rain test, but the top plate dial layout is just horrible. There's all this real estate on top, and nothing is done with it. Look how tiny this exposure comp wheel is. I mean, does it need to be bigger than that? No, but there's still all this huge empty real estate up here they could have done something with. Did nothing. The tilting screen is nowhere near as articulating as on the X-H1. It only flips out. It does not flip out to the side. But hey, this is Sony's cheap camera, right? I mean, it doesn't need to flip out also. Well, okay. But people keep saying it's the same price, you know? Might I mention to you that nobody else has pointed out the single goddamn fact in saying, well, both of these are the same price camera, which is true. But this is actually a flagship camera made in Japan. This is made in China. The truth is that they could have stuck a lot more in this camera by using Chinese slave labor. Did I say slave labor? I take that back, excuse me. Let's just say really, really low wage labor. That's what I should have said. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. Really, really low wage labor. What that meant was this has a much higher profit margin. This is an old A7 chassis with a new sensor in it and a new main board. That is exactly what this camera is. I'll say, wow, it's so cheap. So cheap compared to what? Sony A9? Sony A7III? Yeah. What the hell am I getting for $2,000 with this camera? Well, what you're getting, and there's not been a single Sony fanboy point out this fact, because they have no empirical reason to say anything other than this. The only thing you're getting with this camera is great battery life and great dynamic range and great eye autofocus. Those are the three things you're getting with this camera. The user interface on this camera makes me want to stick my crotch in a meat grinder and sandpaper my eyeballs. Actually, this is a fair review, but I know people are going to say this is not a fair review. I promise I'd be fair to this camera. There's something really shocking about this camera, and I do mean this with all honesty. I really do mean this. And the one thing that actually blew me away about this camera is that it made me want to get on my knees and kiss the butt of Nikon and Fujifilm right in the crack, in praise of how much, even though I like them and use them, how much I would like to kiss Nikon and Fujifilm's ass, you know, after using this. It's kind of like you don't realize what you got until you miss it, like I don't know, like a millionaire, you know, goes to jail or something, like, and he took his life for granted until he, like, wound up in jail. Like, wow, I had everything. This really sucks. That's actually the one thing that kept rolling through my mind on using this. I do mean that literally. Don't mean that as a slander against this camera, which it is a slander against this camera. But it really just kind of made me, wow, my God, I had no idea what I was using. I mean, I knew what I was using was so great, but I mean, this camera, just... Here's another empirical fact. Anybody that, and by the way, this is a factual statement from Sony. The E-mount was designed for crop sensor. Yes. If you actually take a look at this, any with 10 brain cells can see how much this FX sensor was jammed into this crop sensor mount. This mount was designed, not my opinion, for crop sensors, for an APS-C crop sensor. It's kind of interesting actually how they took the mask out of either corner and just, it goes all the way to the edge. Is that a complaint? No, that's just a statement of fact. I can see people love this camera as an FX camera that's very small, and this is the smallest full-frame mirrorless camera. But I mean, hey, this is a small camera with a full-frame sensor on it. It's like, okay, great, let's see how small it is now, girlfriend. There's no such thing, and I've said this since day one, there's no such thing as a small mirrorless camera, because the camera itself is useless unless you mount a lens on it. This is not a small camera. Is that a complaint about this camera? No. It's really a complaint about everybody who keeps talking about how small mirrorless is. Mirrorless is not small. This is a horrible camera with a great engine in it. Great dynamic range, great eye autofocus. Obviously it has superior video. So I should actually take back my statement about what Sony fanboys. There are 4 criteria where people can love this camera. The Sony fanboys can rationalize to themselves how much they love this camera. Hey, it's got superior video, to Nikon and Fujifilm. Sure as hell does. Hey, it's got incredible battery life. Sure as hell does. It's got incredible dynamic range. Well, sure as hell does. And it has superior eye autofocus. Well, it sure as hell does. Those are the 4 things that every Sony fanboy can clap about this camera. Video, battery, dynamic range, and eye autofocus. Everything else about this camera makes me feel like I'm sticking my crotch in a meat grinder. Horrible user interface, horrible design, horrible menus, horrible. Absolutely horrible. Tearing the skin off my knuckles. There's nothing here on the top plate on the left, which is the only damn camera. Hey, look. Hey, we got the most important real estate in the world. The most important real estate on any camera, which is important on the back, but on the top is most important. And over here, well, let's just stick nothing there. Instead of like sticking something like a button, a dial, LCD, so let's just stick jack crap right there. Yep, there's nothing there. Okay, well, that seems like a really smart idea. Really smart idea. For $2,000, if you want to spend $2,000 to get a superior camera, you could traipse all the way back to the Nikon D4 or grab one of those for $2,000 used like new. Infinitely so a superior camera. Built like a tank, weather sealed, toughest camera on earth, has far superior output to this camera. At high ISO, low light, no. This camera will beat the Nikon D4 at insane high ISO, low light. However, it is the case that 99% of professional photographers, unless they're event photographers, they can't use a studio strobe or a speed light in certain situations like an event or a wedding ceremony, they have no problem dropping the light on the sensor. If you want to blow $2,000 on a full-frame camera that's superior in every way to this, get a used Nikon D4. For $2,000 of the Fujifilm, you get their flagship camera made in Japan and easily 10 times, this is a subjective statement, sure as hell is, but I do mean this seriously, 10 times the superior user interface and experience and ergonomics, controllability to this damn camera. Easily. Made better, far, far, far better user interface, superior menus, superior everything. The one thing, like I said, where this does trump Nikon and Fujifilm, battery, video, dynamic range, and eye autofocus. Other than those four things, this camera is a scuzzy bum. It is I can't believe all the BS I've heard from Sony fanboys about how amazing it is. Well, it's $2,000. Yeah, it's made in China. The ergonomics are horrible. The menus are horrible. Sony's totally responsible for that. They know this camera has absolute crap ergonomics. The menu system was designed by a cross-eyed, knuckle-dragging moron. People are going to say this is such a biased review. And it's not. I've been fair to this camera. I've praised it like, hey, this is better. I mentioned where this camera is better. But I was actually shocked at this camera. The peaking on this camera absolutely sucks ass so hard. The focus peaking on this just sucks. Amazing how bad the peaking is on this camera. Other people that have used or own this, yeah, it's far worse than Fujifilm. I thought it would be equal to Fujifilm, and it sure the hell is not. No way, no how. Did I mention this camera has an AA filter on it? Why are there no clickable front and rear command dials for further functionality? Why is the top plate on this camera devoid of sufficient user interface? There's no buttons here, there's no display here, there's no dials here. What the F? I was actually shocked that the EVF on this thing sucks compared to my XH1. And I stuck it in high, not standard. It's like, this is not impressive. It's also a lot smaller. I mean, this is like looking through a pinhole compared to looking through the back of the... And this is beautiful. You know, people don't generally like EVFs. When they do, some do, but rather than a true optical experience. Because all EVFs are like looking at a tiny TV screen. Well, if an EVF is a tiny TV screen, which it sure the F is, this is like looking at an 11-inch monitor, you know, from 10 feet away, and this is like looking at a 57-inch flat screen LCD from the same distance. Far superior experience. Not only does it look better, you have, this is what the Sony is like, the EVF, compared to the Fujifilm, which I'm very used to. Here's the Sony EVF. This is the experience I have with it. Here's the Fujifilm EVF by comparison. Is that subjective? No, that's a fact. This is a lot easier, a lot wider view, a lot more eye relief on the EVF. There's just no doubt. There's way better eye relief, and this is a far, far superior EVF. That also goes to Ergo's user interface. The user interface on this camera, and I do mean this realistically and not abusively to Sony, the user interface on this camera is just crotch in a meat grinder horrible. F minus. Horrible. Unbelievably horrible. Horrible. The hell at Sony is smoking crack to keep making these damn cameras with such a crap interface. Absolutely horrible. Is it worth the $2,000 for what it is? Absolutely no way in hell. If someone actually gave me 12 of Sony's best lenses and said, hey, we're going to give you this camera for $1,300, I still wouldn't even consider buying it. It's like, here's our best lenses, 12 of them. Keep them, free. And we're going to give you this camera, but for $1,300, we're going to knock $700 off on this camera. I still wouldn't even buy it. A Nikon D4 for the exact same money is 10,000 times a better camera than this. For video, hell no. For insane high ISO low light, hell no. But everything else, user interface, output, it was sufficient lighting. Nikon D4 beats the piss out of this camera.